All right, so we're just about coming to the end of our product development conference, but before you go, make sure to tune into this session where we have a keynote by Adam Darcy, Chief Product Officer at Prodigy Finance, on the product leadership using jobs to be done framework. So, can we have Adam please join me on the stage?
Hi, Nathaniel.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. So I'm gonna hand it over to you to have your session, and then once you're done, you can call me back in, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A with the audience around the JTBD framework and everything that they need to know about it. Sound cool?
Sounds good.
All right, take it away.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, hi everyone. My name's Adam Darcy, Chief Product Officer at Prodigy Finance. We do kind of international student lending for high caliber students from emerging markets who want to go to top schools like Harvard, MIT. So we're like a funding platform. And about 10 years experience in Asia doing product and innovation, working for Gojek, HSBC, doing some startups, and now based, just moved back to the UK. Cool, and I'm going to talk to you today about product leadership using jobs to be done framework. The outcome of the session is, so to kind of give you a glimpse of how to establish product leadership in an organization, not through hierarchy, but by actually just leading the process of understanding customer needs. So becoming the lead for that process across all the different functions you have to work with. And I think there's a couple of different iterations of product organizations I've worked in throughout the years. So the top left one there, kind of a very sales-led organization. I started my career in, and the sales team spent most of the time with the customer. A lot of the requirements came back via the sales team. They'd sold a lot of the stuff before we even designed or built it, which was fun, and not always the most innovative way to build a product because the team's quite far away from that customer. The second model I've worked in is more like the product owner model, where you're more like a feature factory. There's stakeholders outside the team who are deciding what you build and when and roadmaps and whatnot. So you tend to just be managing a backlog, which again, kind of low innovation, not a lot of buy-in from the team around you. You're just executing. And then that picture on the right there is the kind of the preferred model, I believe, today, where there's no hierarchy as such, but product is actually the center of gravity, and everyone's basically your peer. And I want to show you the framework that I've been using over the last few years to basically just establish that through kind of customer excellence, if you like, using this framework. So what is the framework? So I don't want to teach you jobs to be done today. I think there's a lot of literature out there. It's quite well established now. But just to give you maybe a 1-minute refresher, using the classic milkshake story. So this is Clayton Christensen, Harvard University. I believe he was a consultant at the time, and he was working for McDonald's. And McDonald's said, we're in the milkshake business. One of our biggest products, and we're competing with Wendy's and Burger King, and we just can't seem to grow in this market. And we've looked at, we've interviewed customers, we've asked them, what do they like about our product? What can we improve? We've done customer journey maps for when they come to our store. We've got personas on all of them, but we've got zero growth here. Like, what do we do? And they decided to try this kind of jobs to be done view of the world. What's the job the customer's trying to do when they buy a milkshake today? And so they went into stores across the US and they just watched people buy the milkshake and went up to them and said, why did you buy that milkshake? And first of all, why are you buying it at 6:30 a.m. so early in the morning? Because that was when most of the sales were happening. And it turns out that they weren't buying it because they were thirsty. They were buying it because they were curing boredom on the way to work. So a milkshake lasts quite a long time in their car, and the average journey was around 1 hour. And they just needed something to keep them kind of engaged on that boring drive to work every day, which they did every single day. And so once they understood these things, and obviously asked a lot more question about what other outcomes are they trying to achieve as they do this job of curing boredom. A couple of other things were, it doesn't run out very quickly. I don't get hungry by lunchtime, and plus many others. And so some of the product innovations they then did based on this jobs to be done view of the world was they made the milkshake a little bit thicker so it lasted even longer. Maybe changed the size of the straw, the width, added bits of fruit to give a bit of variability every now and again to keep them a little bit more engaged. Move the milkshake, created a milkshake machine and brought it to the front of the store away from the queues, etc., etc. And by doing this and realizing that they were competing with not just other milkshakes, but snacks like bananas and Snickers and donuts and things, the market actually grew 7 times because they're competing outside the milkshake market. They're in the cure boredom market on the way to work, and their sales also increased 4 times. So with this kind of view of the world, you can have a kind of a multiple effect on growth as opposed to maybe just an incremental effect, because you're really going to kind of first principles of what's the customer really trying to do here, what's the job they're trying to do. So this is the essence of this kind of different way of thinking. And how can we use this framework to establish product leadership as a product manager in your organization? So I'm going to tell you through 4 stories with 4 different companies that I've worked in over the years. And each one of the stories is trying to show you how we've managed to get buy-in from this particular part of the organization. So the first one is a company called GoPay, which is across Southeast Asia. It's part of the GoTo group. And this is very much about how we got stakeholders aligned very quickly on our priorities without having to spend lots and lots of time convincing them and arguing over whose idea is the best, because stakeholders can have a lot of opinions, especially in bigger organizations. And the second one is the research teams, which I'm sure a lot of us have worked with. Some great researchers out there, and Gojek has some of the best. Gojek is a ride hailing in Southeast Asia, for those who don't know. And they, the biggest pain point for any researcher I've met is, and I hear it a lot, is I've found this amazing insight, but it never makes it into the product. And they get quite upset about that, obviously, as you would. And then the third story is around product design, how to get designers brought into this process, using a company called Momo, which I've been coaching in Vietnam. It's a big mobile wallet. And the last one is Genie. And this is more about the growth of the market. What's the market we're trying to slot ourselves into here? And how do we talk to that market? So story number 1, stakeholders. So I think this was in, I think it's 2020, just before COVID, this was, I remember, maybe 2019. And we were doing a leadership offsite to decide, what are the big bets we're going to make in the next 6 months as teams. And there was about 40 of us, product, marketing, growth, business, engineers. And we had to basically stand up and pitch, this is what our product team is going to build and why, and how that connects to the bigger company goals. Quite a standard OKR setting process. And before going into that, I just inherited this payments product, and there were a lot of opinions already within the group about what we should build. We definitely need to build this. We definitely need to build that. And even the roadmap there were items on there, and which I found out were just placed on there by some senior person because there wasn't that product leadership before. So it's clear this is going to be quite a messy session for me. And I remember one Sunday I went for a walk and trying to figure out how am I going to do this without getting into a hot debate and running out of time before we get anywhere. So I decided to take this job to be done approach and said, actually, well, what's the job the customer's trying to do? They're trying to pay friends and relatives and smaller merchants. And what are some of those outcomes we know about? So we already had lots of research on this. So I found all the slides and interview notes and looked through them and pulled out all of these outcomes the customer's trying to achieve as they do this job. And then inferred some sort of ranking. So how important, based on some of the interview notes and some of the surveys we've done, is this outcome versus this outcome? So you get some ranking. And then how satisfied, how good a job are we doing today to solve that for the customer? And then you can establish quite a nice ranking using this methodology. And then all those ideas we heard from stakeholders, they were all good ideas, but I knew for a fact some of them didn't work because I tried them in previous lives. Don't say no, just say, okay, let's have all the ideas on the table. And if you look at the top of this matrix, so all the ideas are in that first row, and all the outcomes, all the pain points are in column A. And then you can start to say, okay, so for the top 3 problems, which are the solutions which are really going to solve that problem? And is it a must or a should or a could? And you do that for each of the solutions that people are proposing. And then it very quickly becomes apparent that some of these ideas are just not going to help us. And we never say never, but certainly not now. It's not solving the top 4 or 5 problems the customers are telling us they have when they do this job. When we presented this to the organization, it was very, very clean. People said, okay, that makes sense. Like, if you quantify the needs for the customer, who are we to argue with what the customer wants? Maybe we're solving a problem that isn't a problem. So yeah, that really turned the corner for me in how I managed to kind of get stakeholders aligned. And I use this method in various different forms in subsequent teams, and it works really nicely. So that's the number one. And again, you gain that trust as well. Oh, wow, this person really understands the customer needs. They have a scientific methodology that's quantitative. So I'm going to trust this person, and maybe I need to back off with some of the wilder ideas. The next one is research. And I've been wanting to kind of draw this for a while, and it's probably a bit all over the place with all the lines, but I'll try and explain it. So this is where, again, I saw this in Gojek a lot, where a lot of brilliant research teams were getting insights from customers, and then they'd have these huge pitch decks and walk the whole team through it. It'd be really interesting. And then at the end, there'd be this slide saying, these are the key insights, and there'd be 3 or 4 bullet points. And what happened is the language of those insights, at some point, they would just get lost along the product process as people get busy, and designers or engineers, or when you're starting to measure things once they're in market, people just forgot that original list, and it got morphed in some way across the process. And then, of course, researchers are like, hey, what happened to my insight? How come I don't see that in the product? I'm a customer as well, usually. And they get quite upset. So what this process does is that it actually agrees at the beginning a common language called a customer outcome. And you carry those outcomes all the way along the process. So again, if the product manager uses this methodology, then they can actually own that process and go back and forth between the different functions. So let's take an example here. So the product manager, let's say that might be you in green in the middle. And step one is you work with your researcher and say, hey, can we try this jobs to be done style interview, where you talk to them about what's the job you're trying to do, and you try and uncover those hidden pain points, and you write down these outcomes in a certain language. So you agree that up front, let's try this new method. And then you end up getting a bunch of outcomes back, which they heard across, sometimes we do 20, 30 interviews to really go deep. And then you have this list of outcomes, and then you say, okay, which ones are we going to put into a survey? Because obviously we only spoke to 20 customers. We need maybe 1,000 or more to really understand if that's a trend. And then we pick maybe 20, 30 of these and put it into a survey. And then we give that back to the researcher, and then the researcher goes and helps us do a survey and comes back. And then you get some sort of ranking. So if you see these customer outcomes here, we now have maybe the top 3. Maybe these 2 got very low score, but these 2 are super high, very important, and the customer's really unsatisfied. So there's golden opportunities. If we solve these pain points, we're going to be onto a winning product. And then you then pass those outcomes, those top 3 you picked. You then work with your designers and say, hi, here's 3 outcomes the customer's struggling with. How can you design a solution to solve that outcome, to make them more satisfied? And again, you're keeping that same language. You use something called job stories, which I'll explain next. And then you come back to you basically come back with, normally in our game, you get some UX designs back. So we have like the outcome and then a bunch of screen flows which solve that outcome. And then, of course, you can test that, do some concept testing, or if you're more confident, do some user testing, and then that can go into build with your engineers. And maybe engineers, always a haggle. I can't do all 3. I can do those 2. So again, maybe a little bit more prioritization. And then they come back and, okay, now we have some delivered product that's actually in the code. And then you can push that out to customers. And then guess who is there waiting to go and sit with customers and just watch them use this and see how it really works out there in the wild, the original researchers who found the insight in the first place. So this is, for me, one of the most powerful parts of this framework, because you can very quickly become the most popular PM from the research team's perspective in the organization. I remember in Gojek, we had more than 100 different researchers, which I was surprised we had that many on a call, going through this process and how we did it. And then the third story is, how to work with the design team using this methodology of jobs to be done outcomes. So this is there's a mobile wallet in Vietnam, which I've been doing some product coaching for recently, called Momo. They have tens of millions of customers, by far the biggest. And one of the jobs to be done they wanted to help customers with was, how can I pay my delivery driver? So there's a lot of cash, a lot of cash handling when a motorbike driver turns up, food delivery, e-commerce, etc. And so we spent a lot of time doing interviews with customers, doing that survey I told you about. We got the top. We ended up with 6 really highly ranked outcomes or pain points. And then what we did, we spent a week doing a design sprint, or just on the solution side. So we knew the problems. Now let's try and solve these problems together with customers. And we brought in, users and drivers as well, like 3PL drivers, and we had some Gojek drivers come in and Grab drivers, and we really looked at both sides, and are we solving for both sides here? And the language we used was, what's the situation the customer is in, the driver or the customer. So here's an example. When I get a call from my food or e-commerce delivery driver, and then what's the action you want them to take? And that's pretty much the thing they're going to design. So you fill this box in with your designer. So I want to find the amount and payment details before I meet them, because and then this is the outcome from the survey. I can minimize the time it takes to pay my delivery driver. So there was this huge problem with time. We saw it on the customer side and the driver side. So if we can just reduce time on both sides, we're onto a winning product straight away. So all the ideas, and we used this storyboarding technique where we had 6 boxes and solve this job story in 6 kind of storyboards, and then we'll present it back to each other. We'll split into 2 teams and get different ideas, and then we build a prototype, and we got customers in the next day to come and play that back with them and take notes and iterate. So again, that really reduces waste. I think it reduces waste from a designer perspective, because one of the biggest pain points is I've created all these high definition screens for you. I've taken weeks with my team, and they're not in the product. So again, similar problem. And also sometimes the designs can be quite vague and abstract. You didn't quite understand what I meant there. You haven't designed that in the right way, or even I can't articulate what is the right way for you to design. So again, this job story really keeps everybody focused on the outcome. What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? And guess what? We can measure that outcome. Once we put it out in the wild, we can actually see if we've increased that satisfaction score. And the last story is, this is more about the market. So this is like a growth marketing, how to win them and get them on your side. So there's a company which I've been advising for many years now, Genie in Hong Kong. It's a small startup that used to do one of those apps where you suck in all your bank accounts as a consumer, and then it tells you all your expense categorization and tries to suggest you behaviors on how to save and things. And sadly, the market just, the product was great. Customers loved it, but the business model wasn't there, and they needed to pivot their business. And they started to get hints in the SME market. This is during COVID, the beginning of COVID, if I remember. And a lot of SMEs were struggling with cash flow, future cash flow. Like, can I do this? Or if I do this, will I be negative in 6 months from now? So these were like really important skills, which not a lot of new businesses had, particularly the smaller ones. So to really understand this market and who are we serving here and where are they, we used this job to be done approach, where we looked at this kind of forecasting of my cash flow as a small business as the job to be done. And we interviewed many people. We pulled out all these outcomes, and we did this survey. And there's this classic problem with these surveys that if you look at it as an average, like on average, every customer looks about the same. So they answered every question on average about the same score, and you get this big blob in the middle, which plus or minus 10%. It's like, what do we go for here? I don't see any clarity in who has what need and where the opportunity is. So there's this technique called clustering, where you basically take a survey, you put it into this data science algorithm. It's called k-means, and it actually starts to see clusters. So hang on, this third of users here seem to have the same needs together. They all have these top 3 needs or top 4 needs. And again, you can't predict what that is. The algorithm kind of finds it for you. And then there's a section over here of customers which also have these common needs together, and then this one over here. So, and we very clearly saw 3 kind of buckets of customers who look very different. And then we looked at, okay, what are the top 3 needs in each of those 3 clusters? And they were very different. So, for instance, one of them was very much around, I have quite advanced tooling, but I don't have, I don't know how to predict if I hire somebody now, what's the impact on my cash flow in the future? And there were some quite advanced problems they had. Whereas there was another team who were just really worried about accuracy and doing things quickly. And then you can start to color in each of those clusters by looking. So these are like causation-based clusters based on the needs. So they belong together. So you can build a product for each of those individually and solve different sets of problems. But you can start to color those in by looking at like demographics and correlation things, like what tools do they use, how big's their company, what's the income of their company, are they profitable? And we started to see big differences when we looked at that correlation data. So the ones who were more advanced were based in the US. They had much more advanced tooling. They had Tableau and all these other quite sophisticated tools which bigger organizations can afford. Whereas the one we ended up going for and building the product for was very much around using Google Sheets and making a lot of mistakes and very worried about those mistakes. And they just needed some sort of simple tooling which would just give them more confidence that they were making accurate predictions. So this is how we really understood the market, and then we built the product for the market as well using this framework. And then when we go to market, then those outcomes you found, that actually becomes your messaging as well. Cool. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully you can use this in your teams and try and establish that leadership through understanding those customer needs. Thank you. And any questions?
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. We do actually have some questions. So one of the first questions we have here is about the misconceptions around the JTBD framework. What are the misconceptions about the Jobs to be Done framework that you have ever heard?
Yeah, good question. There's a few different schools of thought. So there's a chap called Tony Ulwick who uses this ODI framework, outcome-driven innovation. It's very much about like the tasks that the customer's trying to achieve. And then there's another school of thought, which is, I forget the guy's name now, but he wrote Coffee and Kale, I think was the name of the book. A bit of a Jobs to be Done playbook. And that's a bit more kind of, what are they aspiring to do, and a bit more marketing, kind of leaning towards more of a marketing language. And I think there's a really good book which kind of called the Jobs to be Done playbook. I forget the guy's name, but if you search for the book, you can find it quite easily. It's quite new. And that just kind of brings those ideas together and said, look, they both have benefits and there's a couple of weaknesses, but actually you can use bits from both. So for instance, what I just showed you there, that language of outcomes using minimize the time it takes, that's very much the Tony Ulwick view of the world, which is very much around micro kind of jobs they're trying to achieve. But that storyboarding job story technique is from this other person who has a very different view, and they're always fighting online. You can see blogs. It's quite amusing actually to see professionals do that, but they're passionate about their craft, I guess. But yeah, you can take tools from both of them and actually put them together and just use them in the right context. As we know, process is a process. It's how you use it is what really matters. So that's kind of one, the misconception around those two different ideas. I think you can just ignore them and bring them together. And again, the Jobs to be Done playbook is a great book if you want to just really just cut through all that and take a shortcut. I think the other one is just the difference between a job and an outcome. And I think a lot of people, as soon as you say jobs to be done in an organization, people start to, everything's a job. And you just hear the words again. I remember in Gojek, all the C-suite would start to, the job to be done is this and this. And I was like, that's not really a job, actually. That's more of an outcome they're trying to achieve to do a job. And so getting that language right, I mean, it's not critical, but like that people tend to use it in the wrong way. And you spend a fair bit of time trying to correct it so you can actually be talking the same language across the organization. Not a massive deal. Yeah, I think they're just some of the things that I've dealt with over the years. Other than that, I can't think of anything significant.
All right. Yeah, well, that's plenty. Let's move on to the next question here. We have from Tino, who asks, can you mention any instances where Jobs to be Done is a less effective framework?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've struggled using it on B2B products. It's very good with consumer products where you have thousands of people who are your market, and you can get a lot of data back. It's a very scientific framework, which is why I like it, because it's very data driven. And in big companies, big tech companies at least, they love making decisions via data. There's a very easy way to solve that stakeholder issue I talked about earlier. But when it comes to B2B, sometimes the customer base is just small, and trying to find somebody to talk to who's not busy and wants to talk to you, like you want to talk to a financial controller in a medium-sized organization, it's very hard. Like, they don't want to talk to you. They don't have time. They're very busy. They get paid a lot. They don't care so much about some of this, helping small startups up. But I think that's been a challenge. It's not impossible. I know companies that do it, but so I tend to use it more for the bigger consumer-focused companies, or I've used it for B2B where there's a big market like Genie and the SME one. SMEs, there's a lot of SMEs that are a bit more easy to access, to chat to than maybe people in bigger corporates. Yeah, so that's kind of where I've struggled to use it, I must say.
Right. So it is still like something that you have to think about whether the framework is suitable for the situation that you're trying to implement it in.
Yeah, also internal users as well. So a lot of companies, you'll have PMs working on internal like agent portals and like these service portals that service a customer. And sometimes you've got such small numbers in smaller companies. It's just, you try and use it there, you'll get, you'll ask like 10 people in your team, and that's not really the results might not be valid. Like you might just be, I wouldn't trust those results as much. So we've definitely struggled to use it for more the systems type PMs who look after platforms. It doesn't work so well there, I think.
Right. Well, Tino, I hope that answers your question. I think we have time for one last question. So here's one that asks, any advice on how to use jobs to be done for hiring processes?
Yeah, that's for hiring processes. Do you mean hiring PMs, so using it in a PM interview or designer interview?
Yeah, I reckon this is in terms of scaling the team, building up your team. For example, how would you use the jobs to be done framework if you were implementing a hiring process?
I say if I'm implementing a hiring process,
to
try and expand the team, right? So again, that's probably so I think understanding the job to be done and then thinking about the outcomes and then having some rank. That's the essence of the framework. So I mean, you can use it. I use it in my life. It's a bit sad, but I use it like with my family and stuff. Sometimes when I really can't understand the problem and what are we trying to do, it's quite a quick way to just organize your thoughts, actually. So it's quite good, and understanding what people care about and what they don't, and then that gives you then the focus about where do you actually spend your effort on, right? So I think if I was to hire a team and I needed a process, I would say the job to be done might be I want to basically build a product or like 50 people or whatever, and today I have 5. And then what are the outcomes of that? Well, I really want to make sure that we don't have too many interviews and we spend all of our time, so I want to minimize the time I spend in interviews because, that is really a time sucker and it's important, but you obviously got a job to do as well. Maybe I want to increase the chances that the people I meet are actually of a high caliber, so I don't need to go through too many CVs. I want to make sure that the questions I'm asking are relevant to the job they're going to do. So these are all like outcomes of that job to be done. And then maybe I'd want to then ask other opinions from people and say, hey, of these outcomes, which ones are kind of important to you, and which ones do you think we're not very good at? And then that would then give you a ranking of, okay, these are like the top 5 things which we need to nail in our process to meet our objective, based on what we all think as a team. Maybe the people team would obviously probably lead this, and then you could then go and focus on building a process based on those top few things, which clearly are important. I hope I explained that well. This is a good question.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. But I do find it very interesting that you use the jobs to be done framework in your own personal life as well, outside of work. I'll have to try that sometime as well.
I used to have a boss in HSBC. She was head of innovation, and she had a minimum viable wedding. She was planning a wedding, and she said it's a minimum viable wedding. I was like, what's that? So she basically, you've just got to book your venue. Everything else follows. Like that is a minimum viable. So she uses she has offsites with her husband. I won't mention her name, which is hilarious, but I took it from her. She uses all these frameworks to manage her life.
Wow, that's super interesting. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for taking the time to speak with us here at the conference. But I think that's all the time we have for your session. So thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, to everyone else at home, that is the end of our Product Development Conference 2022. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for participating. Thank you for asking all these questions. And thanks, of course, to all of our guest speakers, all of our moderators. And we hope to see you again at our next event and hopefully in our Product Development Conference next year. On behalf of the Tech and Asia team and all our sponsors and all of our guest speakers, my name's Nat, signing off.